Transmitter device activated. Coordinates set for Earth 2.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Earth 2 podcast, the podcast that explores the origins and the development of the DC Comics multiverse and the legacy of their Golden Age characters throughout the Silver and the Bronze Ages of comics. I'm Peter Watson.
He is Peter Watson, and I'm David Steele, and this is the Earth 2 podcast, and we do talk about the legacy of DC's Golden Age characters, and this is one we've been building up to for a very, very long time.
Mm-hmm.
Listeners, you're probably very aware, if you've listened to our early episodes, of the Golden Age DC Comics superhero and Justice Society member, Johnny Thunder, and his Magic Thunderbolt. They made their first appearance in Flash Comics issue 1, and have appeared several times in the podcast when, in the Flash or in the various JLA, JSA team-up stories. And you're probably aware that Johnny Thunder is a DC Comics legacy name. And you might be wondering why it's taken us so long to mention him.
Mm-hmm.
Well, basically because this week we are looking at issue 72 of Showcase, which was published on the 28th of November 1967. And the cover for this one bears the legend, Showcase presents Top Gun. Now, we're not doing a podcast about the very famous Tom Cruise movie about aeroplanes from the 80s.
Aeroplanes from the 80s.
Aeroplanes from the 80s. That's coming soon from David and Peter Productions.
I think Alan Partridge hosts that.
Yeah, it's Alan Partridge and his dictaphone gif, isn't it? Aeroplanes of the 80s. Showcase 72 bears the legend. Showcase presents Top Gun, and it reprints stories featuring the DC characters, the Trigger Twins, but also Johnny Thunder. And it's not the Johnny Thunder who we know in the Justice Society, it's another character who I tend to refer to as, and I'm not sure if Peter does the same, as the Western Johnny Thunder.
I use that exact same
Yes.
term, yes.
Just for convenience. And so it's quite helpful that this Showcase, which at this point is doing a sort of mix between reprint material and character debut stuff, because Dolphin appears the first time round about now, the Spectre a few issues, the Inferior 5 a few issues. It seems that this was Showcase attempting to revive a couple of their Western characters, maybe floating them, see how things went. Would they get their own comic? We don't know. So we just thought that this issue being published in our chronology that we're following was the perfect point to talk about the Western Johnny Thunder. We're going to do the story that appears in this issue of Showcase, but before we get to that, Pete going to give us some background information.
Thank you, David.
Pete, it was a pleasure.
As David was saying, the original JSA Johnny Thunder first appeared in Flash Comics number 1. That was the 10th of November 1939. Not the 40s, actually still in the 30s.
Amazing.
When that first came out. Now, over the years, his popularity waned, and he made his final Golden Age appearance in All-Star Comics number 39, which came out on Christmas Eve, 1947. Think about that. That's like 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
That's all he was published for.
That's quite a
back in
long
the
time.
Golden Age.
He lasted longer than our man.
Yeah, but just think about comics these days. Think about how long characters last.
Yeah,
and,
I suppose, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Because basically his Flash strip and his JSA membership was taken over by Black Canary, who ironically debuted in a Johnny Thunder story. So, yes.
Yep.
But it was only 6 months later, in June 1948, that the Western hero known as Johnny Thunder made his debut in a story, funnily enough, called Johnny Thunder.
That's a great name for a story.
It certainly is. And that was in All American Comics issue 100, where he joined Green Lantern, Dr. Midnight, the Black Pirate, and there were also reprints of Mutt and Jeff in there.
Cool.
Now, with issue 103, All American Comics became All American Western. And Johnny appeared in every issue until its cancellation with issue 126 in April 1952. Obviously, superheroes were on the outs at that point. The Western heroes were rising. Mm-hmm. It was a complete rebrand, so he wasn't with the superheroes for very long in All American. But Johnny didn't disappear with All American Western. A few months later, in August 1952, he got a regular strip in All Star Western, starting with issue 67. All Star Western, of course, being the series that continued the numbering from All Star Comics, starting with issue 58.
Now that, of course, lets us tell the story about the young Roy Thomas.
Indeed.
Getting his very first subscription to All-Star Comics, the massive Justice Society fan. Would we be doing this podcast without Roy, do you think? I don't think we would.
Probably not.
Because we talked about doing an All-Star Squadron podcast years ago, and that was written by Roy. Anyway, Roy, the story that Roy tells is that he subscribed to All-Star Comics and sat waiting for this first issue to arrive. And it wasn't issue 58 of All-Star Comics that he got. It was issue 58 of All-Star Western, and there were no Justice Society members to be seen.
Nope.
Poor Roy, it's horrible. Heartbreaking.
Indeed.
Terrible.
Now, Johnny's stories ran every issue up until that series was cancelled with All-Star Western 119 in April 1961. Now, most of them were written by Bob Kanigher, and some of the artists in this were fantastic. You had art from Alex Toth, Carmine Infantino, Gil Kane. I mean, it was some fantastic people worked on this. But interestingly, it was only 2 years later, in April 1963, that the original Johnny Thunder and his T-Bolts made his first Silver Age appearance in Flash 137, Vengeance of the Immortal Villain.
Yep.
So it's only 2 years that there hadn't been a character called Johnny Thunder.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
So yeah, so the Western hero actually lasted 13 years.
Amazing.
Yeah, as opposed to Johnny's original 8 years. So that was a longer lasting legacy.
That's phenomenal, isn't it? It strikes me now, just even talking about it like this, that I'm astonished that he never popped up in the Jeff Johns, James Robinson Justice Society series.
Yeah.
You know, because they did quite a lot of stuff with Legacy, and you can imagine him, you know, maybe being sent through time or something, or, you know, them travelling back in time, and Jakeem maybe meeting them or something.
Would have been interesting.
You know, something like that. That'd have been really cool. Maybe that'll happen one day, now that we've said it.
Indeed. Now, over the years, some of the Western Johnny stories have been reprinted. Firstly, in the issue we're covering today, and in a couple of issues of Super DC Giant in 1970, which were popular enough to give him his own series titled Johnny Thunder, that started in December 1972, but it only lasted 3 issues.
Yep. Got all of those. We'll be putting the covers for the 70s Johnny Thunder up on the socials, kids, so don't worry, you'll be able to see them.
All of those stories were reprints, of course, but Johnny made his first non-reprint reappearance in the star-studded lineup of characters that featured in Showcase 100 from February 1978, making that, think about this, making that the third issue 100 he appeared in after All American Comics 100 and All-Star Western 100.
Amazing.
That's fantastic.
How many other characters would have appeared in issue 100s? That's a great statistic. I love it.
Characters that didn't have their own title, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's...
Okay.
Listeners, if you can think of other characters, not like Superman and Batman, who've got their own titles, let us know, because I think that's a lovely little nugget of information.
Yeah.
He also then appeared in the Whatever Happened To backup story in DC Comics Presents number 28 from September 1980. And of course, he features in a couple of issues of Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Yep.
And has popped up from time to time post-Crisis. But also in this issue, it also has characters called the Trigger Twins. Now, they're another 2 Western characters called Walter and Wayne Trigger. They debuted in All-Star Western 58, the aforementioned All-Star Western 58.
Sorry, Roy.
In a story called Two-Fisted Justice, again written by Bob Kanigher, with art by Carmine Infantino and Joe Giella. They ran all the way to issue 116 in October 1960, so it's just short of its final issue, 119 6 months later, because it was bi-monthly. And like the Western Johnny Thunder, they also had a brief reprint title in January 1973, but that only lasted 1 issue.
Yep.
Now, we're going to come across them later in the podcast as they turn up in some Crisis crossover issues of All-Star Squadron. But interestingly, the name The Trigger Twins has been reused. So they have their own legacy.
Yeah.
Post-Crisis, Chuck Dixon and Graham Nolan created 2 Batman villains called Tad and Tom Trigger, also known as the Trigger Twins. They're bad guys this time.
Yeah.
Very exciting. They first appeared in Detective Comics 667 in 1993, and they've turned up several times across the Batman titles before their deaths in Infinite Crisis 6 in May 2006.
I hate Infinite Crisis. All year I've been catching up on the Justice League International Bwahaha podcast, and they quite often allude to the Max Lord and Blue Beetle altercation from Infinite, and it's just like, nah, I'm not into it. The first time I experienced Trigger Twins, I think, apart from All-Star Squadron, was do you remember in 1997 when all the DC annuals had the themed, pulp heroes motif?
Yes.
And the villainous Trigger Twins that you mentioned, they popped up in the Robin annual to kind of confound Robin and the Huntress. Yeah, I'll see what we can do about scraping together some Trigger Twins covers. I'll see if I can post the cover to the to issue 1 from the 70s and maybe that Robin annual. That'd be worth sharing. So yeah, Western Johnny Thunder. When did you first encounter him then, do you think?
Probably Showcase 100.
Right.
Because I would have read that, and I would have read the Whatever Happened To, and then of course I would have seen him in Who's Who, but to be honest, that's probably about it.
I think it must have been in Crisis on Infinite Earths, because there's that sequence when there's a few of the Western heroes together. Spoilers, we won't go any further than that. So this issue of Showcase, as we say, published at the tail end of 1967, were they attempting to revive the Western characters? Were they throwing them out there to see what happened? I mean, there wasn't an immediate new series featuring them. But it's a very important DC Legacy thing to talk about. I'm astonished that he appeared as long as he did.
Yeah.
And actually, in our prep, I've read a couple of other stories, because there's one reprinted in the Greatest 1950s Stories hardback, which obviously led us to our Tommy Tomorrow episode a few months ago. We should probably talk about the setup for the character, the way he works. He's the son of Sheriff Tane.
Yeah, his real name's John Tane.
Yeah.
So.
And John Tane is like the mild-mannered teacher, blonde-haired and bespectacled. And he takes his glasses off, dyes his hair black, etc., and becomes Johnny Thunder. I think in his original story there was an evil rancher or something, so he disguised himself so we recognised that sort of thing. And it's fascinating reading the stories for the moments where John Tane changes into his secret identity. And you think, does he carry hair dye around with him?
Grecian 2000?
Yeah, does he carry some Grecian 2000 or anything that Holly Willoughby would advertise on television or something? Or does he just get some dirt? And people always talk about the whole Clark Kent secret identity thing and how people never recognise Clark or Superman as being the same person. And there's so many scenes in the Johnny Thunder stories where Johnny's father is face to face with him, and his contempt for his son is so strong that he doesn't even recognise him when he's taking his glasses off and his different coloured hair.
Perhaps he does a Christopher Reeve and changes his poise and pose and voice.
He maybe changed his voice a little bit. I suppose there's probably elements of that. I mean, it's been a lot of fun reading these stories again. So we're going to do the Johnny Thunder story from Showcase 72, which is a reprint of a story from All American Western issue 104, which came out in October 1948. And while we're here, we'll tell you as well that the Trigger Twins story is a reprint from All Star Western number 101, which came out in April 1958. If you want to go digging for that through your long boxes so you can see how they compare. Now that we've got all the info dump stuff out of the way, do you want to tell the listeners about the cover to Showcase issue 72?
I'd love to. There's a dramatic red background.
Yes.
The banner at the top has got a small Showcase Presents. And the Top Gun logo that you mentioned, which also has got a revolver at the front of it. And there's a caption that says, "The real Old West explodes to life again, featuring Johnny Thunder and the Trigger Twins." And we have what I hope is a bad guy being shot by Johnny Thunder, who's got a very dramatic pose. His legs are spread wide apart as he fires his gun from his hip, with his dark hair and Superman kiss curl that he has there.
Yes.
He also has a sheriff's badge on, or some sort of star badge anyway. He's got a white hat that's on a string, basically at the back of his head, not actually on his head, but hanging on his back. And in between his legs, you can see his white horse kicking up in the background.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The bad guy that he's shooting does look very shady when you look at him. You know, he's unshaven. He looks a bit grizzled. He's clearly a bad guy. This cover's by Russ Heath.
Ah, lovely.
It's very nice indeed. Very striking the way that the yellow logo, as you would say, pops from the red, and he's silhouetted against the red, you know, with his sort of mustardy coloured shirt and his blue jeans. I like his jacket. It's the sort of thing Michael Nesmith probably was wearing round about now in the Monkees, to be honest. It's a good one. Shall we leap straight in then?
Let's do that.
Awesome. So the first story in the comic is the reprint of the Trigger Twins, as we mentioned. There's also another little reprint of a story called Panhandle Terror, about a baldy, nasty man who causes a lot of trouble in Texas for a whole 3 pages before he gets his just desserts. And then we arrive at the Johnny Thunder story, which is a massive, exciting opening splash panel, full page of Johnny speeding along on his horse, Black Lightning, who's a resplendent white creature, flowing mane, and significantly, a little black mark on his forehead, which is kind of shaped like a lightning bolt, which is where his name comes from.
Interesting.
They're speeding along, Johnny's firing his gun, we have the Johnny Thunder logo at the top, and there's a little scroll insert caption that's been added that says Showcase presents a Top Gun prize winner, which is about half the size of the similar one that's placed at the start of the Trigger Twins story at the start of the comic. It's interesting that Johnny gets the cover, but the Trigger Twins get the first story.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, this opening splash panel has a little caption box that says,
Ray's Ruin and his gang thought they could make an outlaw paradise of Mesa City. One man stood in their way, Johnny Thunder. When they trapped him, they thought they had won, but they didn't know until the battle at Blind Man's Canyon of Johnny Thunder's unseen allies.
Tremendous. And so the story begins properly on page 2. The caption for the first panel says,
As Ray's Ruin and his gang reign up on Mesa Bluff.
Yep, nice bit of western scenery, top of this rocky outcrop. 5 horsemen have come to a stop, throwing up clouds of dust. There's a lovely pink sky behind them. As they draw to a halt, Ray's Ruin says, Mesa City, the only law west of the Pecos. It'd be a perfect spot for waddies like us to hole up in it if it weren't for one man, Johnny Thunder. He's the rattler that helps Sheriff Tane keep law and order hereabouts. And he ain't even a law officer. We get a close-up shot of Ray's ruin in this panel. He's kind of portly-looking gentleman, black hair, some black moustache, little chin bit, with a yellow scarf knotted round his neck, a grey hat, and he's got an eye patch, so he's obviously a baddie. Mm-hmm. To me, I immediately thought this is Vandal Savage.
I thought it was Vandal Savage cosplaying Tom Baker.
Yeah. Tune in next week for the Vandal Savage cosplaying Tom Baker podcast. Yeah, so they've got their sights on Johnny Thunder's hometown. We continue in the next panel, and one of Ray's Ruin's gang members, who looks much, much younger, he's sat on a horse beside Ray's Ruin, and he says,
"What's boiling in your head, Rays?"
"A plan to get Johnny Thunder and the sheriff out of the way, so we can move in and take over this whole stretch for ourselves. This is how we'll do it. We'll kidnap someone special from Mesa City and leave an easy trail to follow. Then when Johnny Thunder and the sheriff sniff that trail to its end, they'll ride right into an ambush." So they ride off in the final panel of page 2. One of Ray's Ruin's goons says,
"With them gone, we'll put the squeeze on the solid citizens to leave."
And Ray's contributes, "And Mess'll become outlaw territory. Our territory. Let's ride!" We arrive at the top of page 3. Caption for the first panel says,
"Meanwhile, at the Mesa Schoolhouse, Sheriff Tane is about to take leave of his schoolmaster's son, John."
Yes, we see John Tane standing with his back to us. Incidentally, he wears a green suit.
And his blonde hair.
Yes, very much like the other Johnny Thunder. And his dad, who's obviously a lot older, he wears a blue hat, has a brown shirt, kind of dark brown trousers. His face is kind of cast in shadow. He was in the back of his horse. And Sheriff Tane is saying, "So you won't give up this woman's work at teaching kids instead of helping me keep law and order in Mesa?"
"You don't seem to understand, Dad. If these kids learn to keep law and order in school, it'll stay with them through their lives."
"Words are all I ever get from you. What good are words against bullets?"
"Sometimes words are stronger than bullets, Dad."
Sheriff Tane rides off in the next panel, silhouetted against the sky with a big tree silhouetted against the sky. It's very, very nice. Mm-hmm. The sheriff rides off saying, "Bah! You're not fit to bear the name of Tane." I can empathise. Anyway, the caption for the next panel.
A few moments later...
Yep, we're with John, who's now teaching. He's standing in front of the blackboard. He's written the word liberty on it in chalk. He's pointing out with a stick. And he's saying to the assembled classroom,
"Words can be stronger than bullets. Look at the word on the blackboard, boys and girls. It inspired people to carve our nation out of a wilderness and to keep it free for you and me. It's our job now to carry on in their great tradition."
However, caption for the next panel says,
After his pupils have gone, Schoolmaster Tane prepares his next day's lesson when...
Yep, see John sat at his desk, pen in hand, when he gets lassoed. Good grief. In the final panel of page 3, he turns to fight against his assailants, and we see that one of them is none other than Ray's Ruin. John takes a kick at the guy who's lassoed him, making one of Ray's Ruin's goons observe,
"Look at Sheriff Tane's cub kick."
And then Ray's himself says, "You must think he's Johnny Thunder instead of a sissy schoolmaster." And we see a great shot really here of Johnny kicking Ray's Ruin's guy square in the face, who exclaims "Yow." It's very funny. We arrive at the top of page 4, and there's a wheat sound effect to signify Johnny's whistling, obviously. But then Ray's Ruin pistol whips him, oofed, with a crack, knocking his glasses from his face. Definitely putting this panel on the socials because Ray's Ruin's associate looks like an absolute nut job.
It's fantastic.
Ray's observes, "Whistling for help won't do you no good." Caption then for the next panel.
As Ray's Ruin's men ride off with their captive...
Long distance shot here. It reminds me of a Terry Gilliam Monty Python cartoon for some reason, just the way it's been coloured here. So we see the horses riding along. John's obviously tied up on the back of one of the horses, and we can see again the wheat sound effect because he's whistling. And as they're riding along, Ray's Ruin says, "That rap on the head must have made him plumb loco. Listen to the little birdie whistle. His gag must have loosened." And one of Ray's mates replies,
"No one'll hear him. Tighten his gag anyway, just to make sure."
The next tiny panel, the whistling is abruptly cut off as we see Johnny being muffled. And as he does this, Ray's goon says,
"This'll keep you quiet, you crazy galoots. A lot of good your whistling did ya. Who'd you expect to ride up, Johnny Thunder?"
Next panel shows, I think it looks like the sun's setting actually, because it's quite a moody pink sky. See them at a distance, moving along, and Reyes observes, "Blind Man's Canyon's where we are heading, boys." In the next panel, we see a shot from inside the canyon. Reyes ruins at the front of the party, riding in. Reyes' pal, who's immediately behind him, observes,
"A sweet spot for an ambush." And Reyes says,
"We can see anyone coming for miles around from the canyon's top." Captioning for the next panel,
"Inside Blind Man's Canyon."
we see that Reyes' baddies have tied Johnny to a tree trunk. Obviously a dead tree, there's no growth at the top of it. Reyes, who's in silhouette, very, very moody. Who drew this story?
Alex Toth.
Well that's not
That
a surprise.
explains everything.
Not a surprise at all. Reyes is observing from his silhouette state, "Well, schoolmaster, while you cool your heels here, we'll be riding back to the Mississippi to make sure the sheriff knows where you are." So the next panel, we see Reyes and his gang taking their leave. Johnny's been bound, gagged, tied to the tree, leaving one of the goons behind to keep an eye on him. And Reyes is saying, "When he and Johnny Thunder come looking for you," obviously he's referring to the sheriff and Johnny Thunder, "they'll run smack into our trap. Keep a good eye on our whistling waddy here, Dork." And Dork, who must be the really odd-looking guy we saw at the top of this page, replies,
"If he makes the move, I'll drill him."
So we arrive at the top of page 5. A little caption says,
An hour later.
we see Dork pulling away the gag from Johnny's mouth. Dork says,
"I bet if it weren't for this year gag shutting your trap, you'd be squealing for mercy like a steer at the slaughterhouse. Let's hear ya."
Panel 2, John Tane immediately starts whistling. And Dork exclaims,
"Huh, must be loco, still whistling. I'd like to know what for."
Whistling obviously continues. A very incredibly moody panel. See that Dork now has gone up to John's forehead. And Dork observes,
"What you smiling about? What's the..."
and then with a whump, we're into panel 3, and Dork has been struck from behind by Black Lightning.
Gosh.
Obviously, yes, who's been summoned by John's whistling. Black Lightning rears up in panel 5, delighted with his success. John starts struggling to, in the background we can see movement lines of the silhouette against the tree. This is incredible. Have we done an Alex Toth story before?
I don't think so. No, I
I
don't
don't think we have either.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not notorious, renowned for his use of deep blacks and moody shadow and stuff, and it's all over this story. John's in silhouette. We can see the silhouette of Dork's heels in the front of the panel. In the background, we see little movement lines to indicate that John is trying to get himself untied from the tree. John cries,
"I knew you'd hear my whistle, Black Lightning, and that you'd trail us. Now you've got to untie my ropes before that owl hoot comes too. Here they are, boy, here."
In the final panel of page 5, Black Lightning has arrived behind Johnny and is nibbling away at the ropes, and they're coming free. And John says,
"You remember doing this before. That's it. Good boy."
it's a good shot of John here. We can see he's got blonde curly hair, the green and black striped suit, and he's wearing the same sort of little loose bootlace tie that the Spectre wore when he fought Johnny quite recently. Anyway, we arrive at the top of page 6. Caption for the first panel says,
Freed, the schoolmaster ties and blindfolds the outlaw.
Yep, Black Lightning looks on, as in the distance in the background, John has tied up Dork and is carrying him towards some rocks. Where obviously he's going to hide him in the darkness and the shadow that they're casting. And as John drags Dork along, John is thinking,
"He can't see through that blindfold, but I'm not taking any chances. He'll rest here while I change into the man they're trying to ambush."
Yep, the next panel shows John at a distance removing his suit. So I wonder if he wears his superhero, as it were, uniform underneath. It can't be too comfortable. Or does he carry it concealed, shrunk down in his pockets?
Maybe Black Lightning has it in a saddlebag.
That's a point. Or maybe
Yeah.
does he have a magic ring that he presses? Because it does look as if he's gesturing with his hand there. Does it expand in contact with the air? Panel 3 now shows that John is now fully transformed into Johnny Thunder. So the suit is gone. He's wearing his blue jeans, brown boots, suede tasselled, mustard-coloured shirt, and has his cowboy hat. So I think you're right. I think you can see actually looking back, it does look in panel 5 of page 5. Is that his hat hanging from Black Lightning? Is it maybe just a water bottle or something? It's not
Yeah,
too clear.
could be. Mm-hmm.
Because when you look at the next panels of the horse, you don't see that same circular item, whatever it is, hanging from his saddle. So I guess maybe that Black Lightning carries a full, maybe spare set of costumes, like a good boy. So Johnny Thunder declares his name as
Johnny Thunder.
leaps onto Black Lightning. In the next panel, as they leaping away, he cries again,
Let's ride, Black Lightning.
Black Lightning, superb. And then we arrive at the bottom of page 6. There's 2 panels. The caption for the first one here says,
Meanwhile, at Mesa City, news of the schoolmaster's kidnapping had been tauntingly delivered, and...
We see with a zonk as a knife pins a little notice to a bulletin board. The notice says, "If Sheriff Tane wants to see his son alive, let him try to get him. The trail starts at the schoolhouse. If anyone but Johnny Thunder tries to help the sheriff, his son will be shot." And it's signed, "The New Law of the Mesa." Final panel on page 6. Several of the townsfolk are standing around. Sheriff Tane is riding off on his horse, throwing up a cloud of dust. Sheriff is looking back and saying, "Tane, my son, has been kidnapped, but the peace. The law has been challenged, and I'm hitting back for it. If I didn't, there wouldn't be any law. If Johnny Thunder shows up, tell him what's doing." And one of the townsfolk replies,
"We will, Sheriff. Good luck."
We arrive at the top of page 7. The caption for the first panel says,
As Sheriff Tane follows the gang's trail, he comes within sight of...
"We're with Ray's Ruin and his gang, who are watching for Sheriff Tane." One of the guys says,
"Look, Race, the sheriff, alone. This is gonna be easy." And Race says,
"Yeah, first you pick him off, then Johnny Thunder. Easy now, boys." Caption for the next panel.
At that moment, riding hard behind the outlaws, Johnny Thunder comes upon the scene, but...
We see Johnny coming to a stop on a cliff top, obviously overlooking what's going on in the canyon. He's aware of what's going on because he says,
"Great guns, they're gonna ambush Dad, but there's nothing I can do about it up here."
and it's an interesting sort of layout for this page. There's none of the little directional arrows that you would get in a few years, because the next panel runs the full length of the page. And let's have Johnny's dialogue first.
"We have to get to the other side pronto. Let's go, Black Lightning."
And they jump off the cliff.
Gosh.
Yeah, it's like that song by the Birds, Chestnut Mare. They go right off the cliff, and as I say, there's no directional arrows, so it's a little bit confusing, because you could, if you hadn't read that panel first, reading it with modern eyes, it kind of makes sense that you read what's actually panel 4 as panel 3, because with a splash, we see Johnny and Black Lightning arrive in the river that is flowing underneath the cliff that they've leapt from. In the final panel of page 7, we see Johnny and Black Lightning swimming underwater. Johnny's thinking,
"They might have heard the splash. We'll have to stay under as long as we can."
Gosh, we arrive at the top of page 8. Now, an interesting observation I want to make here is that whatever it is that he colours his hair with, it doesn't readily wash out very quickly after being immersed in a fast-flowing river. Do you think he wears a wig?
I was thinking it might be a wig, yeah.
A lot easier than having to dye his hair, but I'm sure that when I was reading the synopsis of the original story, it talks about him dyeing his hair to disguise himself. So but maybe he modified it, maybe he got a wig. Maybe there's an unknown story that we haven't read, buried deep in an issue of All American Western called Johnny Thunder's New Wig. Who can say? Maybe when we write our DC comic, we'll cover that story.
We'll do that.
Maybe he got the wig on his visit to Badnesia.
Maybe.
We're at the top of page 8. Johnny and Black Lightning have immersed in the water, and Johnny helpfully says,
"Had to come up for air, but we should be near Dad now."
And the next panel, you see Johnny and Black Lightning fully immersed in the water, walking up the sort of little rocky ground, and Sheriff Tane has arrived. Sheriff Tane says, Johnny Thunder, I'm sure glad to see you. You heard about my son?"
"I found him and freed him. He's all right, but you're riding right into the makings of an ambush, Sheriff."
Caption for the next panel.
At that moment...
We're back with Ray's Ruin and his gang. Very nice, moody silhouette stuff going on here. Ray's Ruin says, "Talk about clay pigeons. Ha! Choose your targets, boys." And one of Ray's goons says,
"Leave Johnny Thunder to me."
The next panel, we can see that they've obviously opened fire, because there's sort of directed bang and blams coming in from the right of the panel. They've obviously been good shots, because Sheriff Tane's horse, we don't find out his name, goes right down, throwing up clouds of dust. Sheriff Tane falls from the back of his horse, saying, never mind me, Johnny. Go get him." And we see Johnny and Black Lightning proceeding at speed. However, there's a bang, and Black Lightning rears up, throwing Johnny from his seat. Johnny exclaims,
"Black Lightning, what?"
The next panel, Black Lightning's down on the ground. Johnny's down beside him as bullets zing past him. Johnny cradles his horse and says,
"That's why you threw me, Lightning. You took the lead meant for me."
My goodness, I hope he's all right. First panel of page 9. Johnny starts to move, saying,
You've done your job, Black Lightning. Now rest easy while I do mine.
I love that. Is that the horse silhouetted at the front of the panel? Or
Yeah.
It's his ear at the top there.
Mm-hmm.
This is very nice. I mean, the next panel's gorgeous. The way that Johnny's hat has been rendered with the shadows sort of showing the full shape of it is astonishing. Johnny fires his gun with a blam, and in the background, in the distance, we see and hear, "Hey!" as he's obviously taken out one of Raisy's baddies. One of Raisy's other goons says in the next panel,
"He got Elmac."
and Reyes replies, "But we got him. Go out and make sure." And we can see in the background of this panel that Johnny is face down on the ground. Uh-oh. So in panel 4, we see the silhouetted spurs, two of Raisy's goons, as they creep down towards Johnny's body. Johnny's down on the ground, his face turned away from him. The trademark Superman-style curl that Pete mentioned earlier can be seen hanging forlornly, his hat draped over his back. One of the goons says,
"He's finished."
and the other one says,
"We'll turn him over and see."
But then the next panel, Johnny springs up and with a bang bang shoots at them both. One of the goons has time to say,
"He's playing possum. Drill him."
but they're too late. The next panel, see one of them recoiling, hands to his head, the other one crouching as he falls forward. There's click click sound effects as Johnny observes.
"My guns are empty."
And we get a nice close up of Ray's ruin as he says, "Johnny Thunder's cold meat when he ain't got lead to throw." We arrive at the top of page 10. The first panel is from, essentially, I suppose, from Ray's ruin's point of view as he points his gun at Johnny, who is now marching towards him. Johnny says,
"You can't kill me, Rays. I'm not a person. I'm an idea, and you can't shoot an idea."
Ray's hand starts to shake in the next panel as Johnny gets closer and says,
"I'm fighting for the idea that men can live in peace without fear."
and in panel 3, Johnny's even closer and he cries,
"If I fall, 1,000,000 men are ready to take my place, but men like you are alone."
You're loco! I'll cut you in two! Cries Ray as he starts firing his gun. In panel 4, bang bang, blam blam. But then in the next panel, Johnny punches him out with a right hook as Ray's falls back, his scarf flailing, and he says, "I missed! At blank range too! Oh!" Slow dissolve. Caption for the next panel says,
After attending to his prisoners, Johnny Thunder returns to his father and his horse.
yeah, it's a good panel here showing Johnny bandaging up Sheriff Tane's left shoulder. Sheriff Tane, who we can see quite clearly here, white hair, white moustache, is saying, "Jumping horn toes, Johnny. Now I'll have to apologise to that schoolmaster son of mine when I see him." Johnny says,
Why?
in the final panel, Sheriff Tane says, "'Cause he said words can be mightier than bullets. And you just proved it." And we see Johnny and Black Lightning both looking very smug and pleased. And a tiny little caption says,
The end. And there's also a lovely Alexander Toth box as he signs his work at the bottom there.
Awesome.
That's
And
very Kirk, Spock, McCoy all having a laugh on the bridge there,
yeah,
I think.
absolutely. The opposite page is the same Team Beam advert mentioning the monkeys that we had with the Spectre last week.
Alec Toth's artwork is fantastic.
Yes.
It's so good. It's really interesting reading this story because some of it really reminds me of other artists that might have taken inspiration from it. I can see a lot of Steve Ditko in this. I can definitely see a lot of Keith Giffen in this, especially with the shading. Later Giffen liked to use the shaded faces a lot. There's tons of that in this. It's really fascinating. The storytelling choices are amazing as well. That panel you're talking about with Black Lightning jumping off the cliff
Yes.
is just beautiful. It's
It
so
is.
good.
Yeah. It is. It's going to be tough picking out 10 panels to fit on Instagram. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I mean, as I said at the top, because we were doing this, I'd read a few other Johnny Thunder stories that I had to hand, and this isn't the best of them, but it's fun. I do enjoy a Western.
Yep.
In the wake of my obsession with the Magnificent Seven a few years ago, I'm much more agreeable to Western stories than I think I'd ever been before. It rattles along. The cover's not entirely representative, I suppose, but
No,
I was very amused by Dork.
yes.
He looked like a real thicko. And Ray's Ruin himself with a distinctive, Rupert Bear style yellow scarf. It was he was quite a memorable baddie. And I really liked that closing sequence there where Johnny just basically talked him into defeat.
Yeah.
Just reaffirming what he'd said when he was John Tane.
Yep.
It's good. I think it's a good message to send kids. That words are maybe a better way of dealing with things rather than fighting or killing. But then, of course, Johnny then
shoots people.
Does shoot people himself, but we can't have always listeners come on.
That's why the West was wild.
Yeah, and it's good that he punches out Ray's Ruin rather than just shooting them at point blank range.
Yeah.
I'm glad we got a shot of him doing the schoolwork sort of thing, because that really
Yeah.
sets him up as the moral guy that he is, you know.
Mhm. Although you don't really see any pupils in the school,
No.
it's just a close-up of him at the front
Yeah.
of the class. So.
You see one of them at a desk, but, you
Mhm.
know, not the densest of stories we've ever done.
Nope.
Not
There's
that-
only 10 pages,
You know,
but it's all
I
crammed
think I
in.
wrote down when I was doing the plan. I think I wrote 4 or 5 cast names down when
Mhm.
doing it. But it's a lot of fun, and it's interesting to think about that they were they contemplating bringing back Western characters full time, because we're not too far away from the introduction of Jonah Hex at this point. As the crow flies, he's a couple of years away. Or maybe was it just a case of, oh God, we've got nothing for Showcase this month. Should we just put some Westerns out? Can you design a logo? Pete mentioned earlier on the couple of issues of Super DC Giant that were published in the 70s, and they appropriated the Top Gun sort of logo and made it Top Guns of the West, and reprinted a few Western stories. So I'll stick the covers for those up on the socials. This story that we've covered, obviously, was originally published in 1948, but in 1959, July 1959, in fact, in issue 108 of Strange Adventures, there was a story called The Last Horse on Earth by John Broome, with art by Gil Kane and Bernard Sachs. And this is sort of set in the far future, the 35th century, in fact. And it deals with a boy called Var Evans, who's, it says in the text here, was regarded as a throwback to the 19th century, imagining he lived in the Wild West, riding his trusty horse in pursuit of outlaws. And it's a basic sort of science fiction space western about a guy who's given a sort of robotic horse, joins the space police, etc. And there's some very clear references to Johnny Thunder, because I'll just read you the little sequence of panels on the bottom of page 3. As Var rides through some fog, and he thinks, they say that nothing, not jeep jets nor the police launch, can operate in this grog. But on a horse it's different. A horse can go anywhere. I learned about tracking from my fictional hero, Johnny Thunder, of the ancient days of the West.
Gasp.
In fact, I named my horse Black Lightning, after Johnny Thunder's Wonder Horse. So there's another panel where Var says, I read about Johnny Thunder riding Indian style to avoid enemy gunfire. That means basically riding along the side of the horse so he can't be seen. Of course, Black Lightning being a robot, the bullets bounce off. This robot horse was built by Var's dad, and some of Var's colleagues are sort of appalled by it. But then the story concludes with some more mechanical horses being built. So it's really a sort of parable, I suppose, about the fortitude and the heartiness of horses. But it's quite interesting, at the same time that Johnny was being published as a Western character still, that they were doing this science fiction-y story that indicated that he cast quite a long shadow. Black Lightning is another DC legacy character.
Yes.
As well as being the Western Johnny Thunder's horse, he's the robot horse of 35th century space policeman Var Evans. And this probably is the ideal point for us to address the other Black Lightning.
Yes, Jeff Pierce,
Yes.
Black Lightning, whose debut is far away.
Yes, who's the one that probably first springs to mind when you think, to be honest, when you think of a DC comic character with the name of Black Lightning. It must be said.
But he's actually the third.
Yes, so there you go. I bet you didn't know that, listeners.
There we go. That's the sort of research we do for you on the Earth 2 podcast.
It is. I mean, did Tony Isabella have all that in mind when he created Black Lightning in the 70s?
Possibly.
I don't think so. So yes, I mean, Jefferson Pierce, Black Lightning, first appeared in issue 1 of his own book, which was published in January the 4th, 1977. We know him well because he was a member of the Outsiders. When did you first encounter the Jefferson Pierce version?
In Black Lightning, his own comic. I had one of those when I was very young.
I'm pretty sure it was an issue of Justice League of America.
Oh, the one where they
invite him to join.
Yeah, with the regulator.
Yeah,
and they're all in disguise.
Yeah, that famous cover.
Yes,
with that jive bunch of turkeys in the JLA. You know, that awful dialogue.
Yeah, it's terrible, but it's wonderful at the same time.
Obviously, in the past, Peter and I have alluded to what we would do when we write our own DC comic.
Yes.
I think the 3 Black Lightnings.
They should team up.
Is an essential.
Of course.
When Johnny Thunder's horse gets transported through time into the future and then they both team up with Jeff Pierce, I think that would be amazing. The original DC Black Lightning was a horse. You had it here first, so maybe you didn't, but yeah. Amazing. So,
it's interesting that they never really brought this Johnny Thunder back. As I said, there was the short reprint series, there was the Whatever Happened To, but really, compared to all other Western heroes, he sort of faded from view. And I wonder if that's maybe because they thought people might get confused with 2 characters called Johnny Thunder.
I don't know. I mean, it's possible because, you know, the Johnny Thunder JSA guy pops up occasionally.
Yeah.
You know, there's the JLA JSA team up where the Earth 1 version of him comes back which can't be too far away from when the Whatever Happened To story was probably. And I remember I'm sure the Whatever Happened To actually refers to the guy we've been talking about today as the Western Johnny Thunder. They make that distinction. Uh-huh. It's possible. I suppose they could have called him Johnny Lightning or something, I suppose. But, you're right. Remember when DC Comics revived Jonah Hex for Vertigo Comics and did Two Gun Mojo and all?
Yeah.
They could have done something like that, but I think that might have spoiled the innocence of the character. Nighthawk, one of the other DC Western characters, obviously retconned as being one of Hawkman's past lives at one point. Mm-hmm. So, he's off the chart. But he does pop up in Crisis, as we say briefly. Yeah. I can't even think the last time I ever heard mention or saw him, in a comic ever, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's a shame.
Yep.
Because I'd say I've read a few stories recently. I've got the 3 issues of the 70s reprint. I've got the 1950s hardback. Mm-hmm. I've got the Top Gun issues. They've all got stories, and they're great fun. It's an interesting character. It's an interesting spin on the superhero identity.
Yeah.
His dad doesn't rate him. It just shows that his dad's an idiot for not really realising his son's true worth and all. And there's a lesson there for us all, I'm sure.
It's not just his dad, it's the entire town.
Yeah.
Every time I read Mesa City, I kept on thinking of Mega City from Judge Dredd.
I kept thinking of Jar Jar Binks for some reason.
We said people are going to die?
Yeah. Like I say, I've managed to scrape together a few bits and bobs for the supplementary material for this issue. So be sure to check out our Instagram and Facebook pages. You can find them under the Earth 2 podcast. You'll see the cover and some panels and some other DC Comics goodies.
And sadly, there's no reader reaction from this period either, so we don't know what the reaction was to this story.
Yeah.
Other than the fact that he didn't really appear again until more reprints further down the line.
Yeah. I think it's significant that they gave him, 3 issues of a reprint, but they were reprinting so much in the early 70s at that point. There's points when, when you look back at what they were putting out, and half the stuff they were putting out was reprints of old material.
Yeah.
Probably just to clear all that paper backlog they had. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we'll never know, I suppose, if this was just done as a stopgap, or if maybe they were thinking about doing a Western anthology series, because they were still publishing several war books at this point. I don't know. Maybe we'll uncover something, but yeah.
Yep, that doesn't stop you from getting in touch with us, telling us what you think about this story, what you think about the team up of the 3 Black Lightnings. Should all the Johnny Thunders team up to save the Black Lightnings from an evil fate, a terrible fate?
Should there be an inter-company crossover where the Kyle Richmond Nighthawk teams up with the DC Comics Western Nighthawk? I'd pay $2.95 to read that any day of the week.
There we are. That'd be exceptional.
It would be.
Yep. So you can email us at theearth2podcast@gmail.com, and as well as the Facebook and Instagram that David's already mentioned, you can follow us on Twitter, where we're at podcast_Earth2.
Tremendous. Right, well, I'm gonna just go and polish my sheriff's badge and go out riding about on horses or something in a vague attempt to try and make this some kind of Western themed wind up.
I'm gonna go and shoe a horse.
Great idea.
Excellent.
Awesome.
On that note,
yes,
I've been Peter.
He has been Peter. I've been David, and everything, and we'll see you next time on
the Earth 2 Podcast.
Yeehaw!
Transmatter Cube activated. Return coordinates set for Earth Prime.
So we can move in and take over this whole stretch for ourselves. Jim lad. Try that again.